writing than the ancients, than the people in the medieval, or, you know, when this material was taking hold. And, you know, I told you a long time ago that, probably several times in this class, that Plato understood the role of poets in his society, which is why I consider what we're dealing with, this is literature in my mind, and it is not history. And it is, that's what we're looking for, the history in it, if we can find it. And you're the only ones who can judge if we find it or not. I have my opinion, and you have to determine your opinion. So we've been laying out the situation in terms of what one might or may not want to rely on. But Plato felt, as I've told you often, that the poets were pernicious. And so they did have a lot of, Plato obviously didn't have a very poetic soul, although he was a religious person who talked about the theory of ideas and forms and was very interested in spiritual things. And Neoplatonism is a direct result of his attempt to be religious. I think his famous religious dialogue would be in the Phaedo and the Timaeus. I think those are some of the dialogues where you'll find a lot of Platonic religion. So, God, look at the turnout today. It must be some event going on. Anyway, so he felt their work was pernicious, so he knew them. Then the reason he felt is that they created the myths by which the ordinary people lived. And I think that's really extremely telling vis-a-vis the literature we're dealing with here. I was listening the other day to a Darwinian who's written some books slamming religion. I think he called it Religion as Delusion or something like that. And he was going on, and he was at, I think I'd mentioned him to you last time, made a big impression on me because I just liked him intensely. He was a kind of supercilious Oxfordian English person who people bow down before because they think he's so bright and intelligent. He could turn, you know, beautiful phrases and put down idiot, you know, simple-minded people in the, you know, most elegant way. And he was arguing for atheism, and he was heaping abuse on the Old Testament as a violent, you know, brutal book and things like this. But everything he missed was that this was literature. This was literature meant to inspire, you know. And he misses the whole beauty of the prophets, missed everything. I would have loved to have been able to had a go at this guy, because the people from this was in Lynchburg, Virginia, and the people from who's that guy of the moral majority? What's his name? Has a university in Lynchburg. You know the one. What? The preacher, what?
Falwell.
Jerry Falwell, that's him. Jerry, thank you very much. Jerry Falwell has his Liberty University, he calls it. So all his students poured out to try to attack this person, but they did it in the most simple-minded way that this person had a field day, you know, destroying them, you know. And the point that he was missing, I think, is that people need religion. I wouldn't say it's the opiate of the people, as Karl Marx tried to make it out to be, in a famous expression. It's only, I think, only religions that deceive people are opiates. Religions that inspire and lift people up, I don't think can be considered to be opiates in that way. I mean, if there's a religion that said you should be righteous, I don't think it can be considered an opiate, in the sense that we would like, I think, to live a righteous life if at all possible. The religions maybe that try to pretend to tell people how to be righteous, maybe, and do it in some very odd, weird ways, maybe described as opiates. But I think Karl Marx is a little off the beam, just like this fellow who was a Darwinian, total Darwinian, and laughing at the need for religion. People need religion because people only live a short span of life. They have an extended life. I read an article the other day that turtles don't age, and when they die, they usually die by some accident or misadventure or something else, humans killing them or whatever. They've mastered the art of not aging, but they've slowed their metabolism way down too. There's a series of articles in the New York Times Science section a couple of days ago on tortoises and turtles in that regard. Quite a surprising conclusion, I felt. By the way, if you notice today in the newspaper, I'm off the subject a bit, but there are some things that running around in the brain here that may be useful to have communicated. They have suddenly discovered, amazing, that circumcision cuts the age rate in half in African countries. It's not a total cure, but it is a great pushback barrier, shall we say. And again, I'm sure that's why these ancient peoples were circumcising. I don't think that it became a religious thing in time, but I'm sure they had folk experience of these deadly diseases that were encountered in sexual activity, and they found this little procedure helpful in pushing back on it. Not that it was a cure, it was just a deterrent to some extent. And I'm not advocating it or building it up, just explaining how I think it came to be, yes.
And they had a lot of interesting ideas. Their rituals pointing to a lot of really useful things. Don't eat pork because it takes food from the people.
Oh, yeah.
And all of these rituals are born out.
Oh yes, but don't forget, you should not wash your hands before eating because your ancestors didn't. So I'm kidding around. No, we all recognize that most of the purity laws are based on real concerns, but expressed in the ancient manner of taboos. So people say, "Oh, circumcision, that's just a big joke." It's not necessary, obviously, or unnecessary, but it was obviously, I think, at some point. I don't think there was a treatise written saying that this is the case. It was obviously became clear to people living through generations, and people aren't as stupid as you think they are, that this had a, what do you call it, a deterrent effect. And it's 50% apparently in African countries. The measurement of populations that aren't and are, it's a 50% less age rate. And it can't be attributed to some other factor apparently than that. So that's, and you can understand why they had in the article about the foreskin rupturing sometimes, and that the foreskin is a place where there are certain, and I didn't read it that closely, certain antibody cells or whatever that aids molecules or they are glom onto more easily. And so I give the ancients credit for not being total idiots. So anyway, that's off the point. So this chap was heaping abuse on religion and so on, and fair enough. But people live only a short time. They're conscious maybe 30% of the time, 30 years out of that time, mature consciousness. Before when they're growing up, they don't have mature consciousness. They have a pleasant romantic consciousness. When they're aging, they're deteriorating. So maybe you're good for 30 years, and you're looking at an infinite universe. What are you supposed to do? You need something to hold on to give you a little bit of confidence and feeling of well-being. And I think that's what poetry and literature does. So I'm not, and I think that is fair. And so this person would say, "Oh, you should all be atheists." Why should you be atheists? It's a matter of aesthetics. I prefer to look at the world in this manner. It may not be accurate. It isn't accurate, obviously, that the world's only 6,000 years old and so on and so forth. It may be accurate. It may not be accurate. But to my mind, as long as it's an elegant way of looking at the world, it's a more elegant way of looking at the world than an empty way. And it's more creative, and it's more satisfying, and it's more comforting, as long as you realize all of those things. And it gives me the will to go on. It gives me the ability to overcome crises and things. So as long as they're not harmful things that are involved in this, and I'm afraid Islam has illustrated some of the harmful things that could be involved in religious practices. And Buddhism, on the other side, might be a little bit too quietistic in the sense of not wanting to do anything about the ills of the world and thinking that the ills of the world are just there for you to overcome spiritually and get on with your ride into other cycles, higher cycles of being, and so on. I'm not sure all those things I'm not criticizing those religions, but I think that those things have to be looked at with some sort of care to make sure. And I think Christianity has to be looked at with some sort of care, as does Judaism. So that's what we're doing. Anyway, let's go back here. So you said I was on Matthew what? Matthew's the easiest one to follow. What's his name? Jesus Barabbas. What passage was it? Matthew 27. What was it?
15 to 26.
15 to 26.
Matthew 27.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we did all of that. A certain Luke has most there. A certain Barabbas who had been involved in insurrection. Well, let's be frank. That's what was going on in Pilate's time, insurrection. Murder, I mean, obviously not. If he's in insurrection, he's not murdering someone. He's involved in confrontation that could end up in deadly circumstances. We don't call that murder. He's not someone who goes around, oh, he might be a cutthroat, he might be a Sicarii, we don't know. But the Sicarii movement, according to Josephus, wasn't founded yet. What was it? When was it founded? In the 50s with the assassination of the high priest Jonathan. I mean, I don't think we have terrorists like are in Baghdad or just killing for the sake of killing in Palestine. That was never the case. Traitors were being approached. People who were thought were being exploitative or playing, taking advantage of relationship to the Roman overlords and so on. Those were people who were marked out for problems, just as it would in any society. You want to date this and pass it around? Thanks. In any society in a revolutionary situation. So how did this suddenly creep in here? We have Matthew. It's Pilate's wife coming in and recognizes Jesus as a Sadiq. That's like Herod, as I told you in the John the Baptist episode, Antipas, the Tetrarch, not wanting to kill John the Baptist because he was a righteous man. These things are clearly thrown in to do what? Conciliate the writers and the literature to the upper class authorities. This is like what you would do in Russia if you didn't want the NKVD after you. I hate to be cruel about it, but it was my last day and I don't have any time to be kind there. If you think Pilate's wife recognized Jesus as a righteous man, then, I don't even know if Pilate had a wife. I have a suspicion he may have been gay or something like that. Now, there's no indication about Pilate's wife in any other literature, but I'm sure she wasn't out there in Jerusalem with him. No Roman matron would want to be out there in Jerusalem in the middle of this chaos any more than most American wives would be sitting in the middle of Baghdad today. And, this is folk literature for the ears of people in the Roman Empire and the Roman authorities. How could that be? Because the people who wrote this material were aware of the situation they faced, not in Palestine, but overseas abroad in the great Roman Empire, where these insurrections were being suppressed. And that's how I would see that. You're welcome to see it differently. You're free. It's in Mark, I see 7, and it's also in Matthew 15 and so on. Notice the feast is Passover, and Passover is the time where these sorts of insurrections traditionally occurred, as Josephus will tell you, and we have them going on from the 4 BC period all the way up to the 66 AD and the final uprising. So really, you have 70 years of insurrection going on here. And Jesus is whoever he may have been and how historical you want to make or put the picture of him here, he is operating in the midst of these things. So you can't be a Sodder in Baghdad with your little following of whatever Sodder says his people are all peaceful and so on and so forth, his private army or a private group of followers. You can't be a Sodder in Baghdad, taking over the temple, doing things on the street with the people without the authorities suspecting you're involved in insurrection in a revolutionary situation of this kind. And that's what I think everyone, you know, the picture here is the Jews are horrible, and every Jewish person wants to destroy this poor man who is only preaching peace and so on and so forth. And the Roman governors are really forced by these nasty Jews to do these things that they don't really want to do, and so on and so forth. That's script writing. I hate to use Bill O'Reilly, that's spit. And I mean, you couldn't say, why didn't people ever say this? If you said this in up to the 17th century, you'd be burned. You'd be literally burned from the 300s to the 16th, 1700s. Galileo were just saying that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, was put under house arrest for the rest of his life, and he just Giordano Bruno was burned, but Galileo barely escaped the same fate because one of the popes liked him, and also because he was maybe a little too famous to treat in that way without some repercussions. So, you know, you say, what, only since 1700? Yeah, really, only since the starting of the separation of church and state could you get people talking, and that's when you got the quest for the historical Jesus. Albert Schweitzer wasn't the first, he was a long line of people. He summed up the quest for the historical Jesus in the 1800s. But people who had begun thinking, Spinoza had started thinking about these things in the 1600s. He was excommunicated by the Jewish community. They didn't have the power to do anything horrible to him, but they didn't want to be associated with him, so they cast him out in the sense of, look, he's Spinoza, he's a free thinker, don't, and he thought about religious things. He actually said, if only for circumcision, he thought the Jewish people would have survived. That was actually something out of one of his writings that I personally recall him saying, as we mentioned that particular practice today. And then, up until the 20th century, we didn't have external evidence like the scrolls to even make these evaluations on. So, okay, John has, shall I release to you the King of the Jews? And we did all of this, and the people, they don't want Jesus, they want Barabbas. Now, the only other interesting thing to say about Barabbas is his name, Bar Abbas, which means son of the Father, and of course that's Jesus' name. That's Jesus. I can't keep these things going. That's Jesus' name. He's supposed to be the son of the Father or the son of God. So people have said that Barabbas is a shadow inversion of Jesus. That basically the Barabbas thing is more of like the real event that happened, and then the Jesus story is written over it as an inversion of it. Now, it's not my idea. I just leave you with that as something to contemplate. There's probably, I think the best authority for this is S.G.F. Brandon, who I told you about, Jesus and the Zealots, who really went deep into these kind of matters. Yeah.
Well, I had never known that Bar Abbas was the son of the Father. You just mentioned it earlier. I was sitting here the whole time thinking, if people are crying, let the son of the Father go, they're calling for Jesus to be released, right?
Well, that's the implication of what people like Brandon are trying to point out. Yeah. But anyway, the point is, I don't even get that far, because again, I don't know how these writers got this intimate information of the trial and scenes. I'm just not sure about material. Unless I can find something that, to me, historically recommends itself as sensible in this situation, I'm not able to even make evaluations of the kind you're making, but I've already expressed the opinion that we do know that Pontius Pilate was involved in the crucifixion of the Samaritan Messiah. And I'm wondering if there weren't some Samaritan texts, as I said, that were floating around that were then, sometime later, because you said the Samaritan Messiah, as I told you, is Joshua ben Joseph, Jesus ben Joseph. Why is the Samaritan Messiah Joshua ben Joseph? Joshua, and Jesus are supposed to be the same name. Jesus being an approximation for Joshua, Greekified Christ. And by the way, when you see this here, just the letters, I don't know where this name came from. But just look at the relation to things like ISIS here. I mean, J's were usually written with I in Greek. And forget the vowels, just look at the relationship to other godlike names that are going on here. And we know that Isis and Osiris and Horus have a lot to do with the way the Holy Family was presented in later Christian iconography based on Egyptian models from Egyptian tombs. I'm not trying to go any further than that. I'm just trying to say I don't know where this material came from that is being incorporated here. But as you see, it isn't consistent because John counterindicates a lot of these things. But the Samaritan Taheb was supposed to be a Joshua redivivus, a Joshua brought back to life. And what he was doing was operating on the mountain in Samaria, where Joshua made his farewell speech in the book of Joshua, Mount Gerizim. I don't have time to go into all of that, but that's where Joshua assembles all of the tribes. We did that when we mentioned Stephen's speech and the mistakes that Stephen makes about the tomb of the patriarchs that he thinks is in Samaria and not in Hebron. He takes that from the Joseph stories. Now, why is Joshua associated with Joseph? Because if you look at the tribal denotations in the Old Testament, Joshua comes from what tribe? You probably wouldn't know that, most of you, but some of you do. What tribe is Joshua? Ephraim, and Ephraim is the principal son of Joseph, so he's a son of Joseph. And the Jews had two messiahs, a Messiah ben David and a Messiah ben Joseph. That's the Talmudic literature speaks of that. And clearly they meant by the Messiah ben Joseph, the Samaritan Messiah, the Messiah of the northern tribes. So Jesus well, first of all, I've already expressed the opinion here that Joseph was not anything to do with Jesus' father. That we have enough material from Christian sources that make it very clear that Jesus' father is something to do with Clopas or Cleophas, who is considered to be a brother of Joseph in a lot of the sources. So there is that. Again, I've said in my James book, as the supernatural Christ took hold in the 2nd century, the idea that the Messiah was not a man, and then of course Trinitarianism developed in the 2nd and 3rd century. The idea that the Messiah was not a man took hold in the 2nd century, and we even know the book that it took hold in. It's called the Proto-Evangelium of James. I'm never going to get through this. The Proto-Evangelium of James. I don't know what's wrong today. Where the writers know that James is the closest person to Jesus. That's not the James, son of Zebedee, brother of John. That's James, the brother of Jesus. And in that document, they have James saying, because they know he should know the most about Jesus, Jesus is not my real brother, he's my milk brother, or something to that effect. And they announce the split in that document between James and Jesus' other brothers, and have James, Jesus' brother, admit that Jesus isn't his brother. So that's where we first get the split of the Jesus from his brothers, and the claim that Jesus has a different mother. In any case, the mother, it's not the different mother, it's the different father that's the problem. The brothers in all of the literature from the earliest Papias, P-A-P-I-A-S, in the 1st century, knows that Mary and Clopas had 4 sons. Look at my James book. James, Joses, Simon, and Judas. Now we know a lot about James, Simon, and Judas. Could be Theudas, sometimes called Thaddeus, sometimes called Judas of James, sometimes called Judas the brother of James, sometimes called numerous other names. And depending what literature you get, you have to read my James book on that. And I say that Joses we don't know anything about. But then look at the name Joses. Take the vowels away. Joses. It's just Jesus again. So my conclusion from all that is, since we don't know anything about Joses, the fourth brother, Joses, is in fact Jesus himself. And what I have basically said, that as the supernatural Christ divorced Jesus from his brothers and created a new person, supernatural being, mothers became sisters. That's in the Gospel of John. Mary, the sister of the Mother of God. I'm not saying it very well. Brothers became cousins or milk brothers. Fathers became uncles. And Jesus or himself turned into his own brother, or vice versa. I'm not getting it right here. My friend here has come in here and started traveling with his baggage, so I'm a little thrown off from what I was trying to say. That's all right. Why don't you sit on that chair there? Would you give him that chair in front of you? That will really help me concentrate. Yeah, turn that one around. Give him that chair. No, he's got this chair next to him. That's cool. We got such a big turnout today. I can't. I'm really throwing off my face. Anyway, let me see if I can get that a little better. As the doctrine of the supernatural Christ gained momentum in the 2nd century, I guess that's the mothers turned into sisters, fathers turned into uncles, and Jesus, if you like, or turned into his own brother, or something like that. And these are the things that I think happen as you got the conflict of the supernatural Christ with the natural Christ in people's minds. So we have, why are we talking about it here? Because Jesus Barabbas represents another such character. I want to say one more thing about Jesus Barabbas before moving along. That character, and we've mentioned a lot of things now, the Samaritan Messiah, Jesus ben Joseph, and so on. The Messiah, the son of Joseph. That character I mentioned in the very early part of the class, I didn't bring it, I should have brought today, Josephus's picture. Jesus ben Ananias is the prophet who appeared 7 years before the fall of the temple. 7.5 years, 62 AD, right after the death of James. And he never stopped calling, Jerusalem is doomed, Jerusalem is doomed, Jerusalem is fallen. It's in Josephus as one of the signs for the destruction of the temple. I told you about that character at the very beginning of class, I hope, didn't I? I think I did. But if I didn't, there you have him again. Very important episode. Josephus links him with armies riding across the sky, heavenly hosts coming on the clouds of glory. I think a cow gave birth to a lamb in the middle of the temple. Okay, very exciting. Or a lamb gave birth to a cow, I'm not sure which. The doors of the temple flew open of their own accord several times. And finally at the end, the priest heard the voices crying out, let us go forth as the Holy Spirit, or whatever it is, left the temple. He's got all the signs importance for the fall of the temple. And he also talks about the star prophecy. And the fact that the young men were zealous for it, and this was the main thing that led to revolt against them. This is a very important part of the Jewish war. It comes at the end. And among those things, he talks about this Jesus ben Ananias. And he's arrested by the Roman governor. And he doesn't speak when he's questioned. And they flail him and beat him and do all kinds. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's not even like Jesus. He hasn't even done anything wrong. And they flail him or beat him with this, that. Mel Gibson would have had a great time with him. And they do whatever they can to this poor guy. And he will not stop uttering his cries. So then finally they throw him out and they release him. You see, you get an arrest and release there. But he keeps on going around bemoaning for 7 years without end. You know, in early Christian literature, I tried to point out, there is supposed to be an oracle that after the death of James, the Christian community in Jerusalem was told to leave Jerusalem. There's the oracle. There it is in Josephus. Right there. That's what they're talking about, but they put it in different terms depending on who's talking about it. And he's saying Jerusalem is doomed. Why is he saying that? Probably because of the death, as the early church literature puts it, of the righteous one. That without the support, as the early church literature puts it, Jerusalem could no longer remain in existence. So the righteous one is the pillar of the world. When they removed the righteous one, they removed, shall we say, the support, and so on and so forth. But that was James. Then Oregon, I cover all this stuff in my James book, which I think is a pretty good book. No one else ever covered this stuff, ever. I still get emails and phone calls about that book almost on a daily basis from people, which is really odd to me. It's Oregon and Eusebius complain about Josephus. I think Jerome too. Because in the copy of the war or that they saw, Josephus said that Jerusalem fell because of the death of James, not Jesus. And they said, he's wrong, he should have said Jesus. But in our copy of Josephus doesn't say that anymore. Where might he have said that? I think in these things about this Jesus ben Ananias, or in the material about where he talks about the death of Ananus ben Ananus, when he explains that and describes his death in exactly the way early church people describe James. I can't speak any more about that, but I can say that some of the material about Jesus ben Ananias seems to me to go into the portrait here. Now there's another book called the Slavonic Josephus that Robert Eisler parses in huge detail. The Slavonic Josephus, I mean, which was a text that came down through Russian, Old Slavonic, Byzantine, Old Slavonic sources. And there it had some different things about what Josephus may have said about Jesus, if he said anything. And one of the things that is in that portrait is that Jesus is first arrested and then released and then rearrested, which seems to link up a little bit with this Jesus ben Ananias episode. Now, I can't go any further than that. I don't usually speculate in those areas. I'm more a literary critic. But you'll find all that kind of material in Brandon and Eisler, which is pretty good. Anyway, in John, to make a long story short, on 1912, the people are giving Pilate advice. If you are Caesar's friend, then you have to deal with people trying to make themselves a king without Caesar's permission. Oh, come on, really? The people are giving Pontius Pilate advice. I'm going to give Joe Stalin advice. I mean, honestly, I have to be cruel here, but I don't have time to be kind. That just doesn't. You see that who and what is dealing with this thing. I want to find historical Jesus. I know there's an historical James. I know this is an historical John. I'm pretty sure there was a Jesus who preceded some of these people and was killed in an unhappy manner. But I want to find him. I don't want to substitute poetic, agenda-ridden material for historical material. So that's something you're going to have to, I don't know what the answer is. Again, you're the man. And then John at the end, shall I crucify? He's asking the Jews, shall I crucify your king? Pilate is saying he's your king. No, come on. Shall I we have no king but Caesar. Okay, no, come on. No. Maybe the high priest, as it's portrayed, may have tried to suck up, shall we say, to him like that. But I used to believe everything when I was young too. I believed everything. I read these things. I never saw anything wrong with any of these materials. So if you've never seen it or even considered such things, don't feel bad. Even horrible people like myself never saw anything wrong with anything. It took me till I was 60 or so, 50 or 60. It took me 30 years to begin to see what was going on in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It did help me a lot. Okay, here's the crucifixion. We get some new people introduced. Siren of Cyrene. Cyrene is a hotbed of revolution. These terms may not always be represent what they are supposed to mean. Could be Simon the Zealot, and someone wrote in Cyrene. But anyway, the father of Alexander and Rufus. wanted to bear the cross. That's in Matthew 27 and Mark 15 and Luke 23. And a lot of women came after him, and daughters of Jerusalem, weeping for yourselves and your children and so on. It's so much material here that it's almost impossible to evaluate it all. But I think the Simon and I think the Alexander and Rufus, maybe they were two believers in the community in which this particular version of the Gospels developed, and they wanted it known that they had some connection with the events that occurred over in Jerusalem. They might have been living in Rome or someplace, and they told the people who were working on this material, "Look, our father was there, and he did such and such." Well, you know how reliable testimony of children about fathers is. In any case, I doubt very much if that particular little bit of data, it makes it even worrisome as well, that the narrator suddenly knows that the two people called Simon and Alexander and Rufus, very clearly Roman names, Latin names, at least Rufus. Alexander, okay, was used by Jews, but I never saw any Jew anywhere called Rufus in old literature. And I doubt very much if these are meant to be Jewish people, well, certainly not Rufus. I know you'd have to look in the Josephus, maybe you'll come upon a Rufus. Look at how Luke adds to that. And a great multitude of people wailed and lamented him. Well, there's more, we're back to the other side of the coin. Jesus is a popular leader. Who's wailing and moaning him? These are Christians? These are non-Jews? No, these are... So again, the narrator can't get it straight whether Jesus is a popular leader or not a popular leader. If he's a popular leader, why is everyone trying to, blame the Jewish people for having done away with him? You can't have it both ways. If he's a popular leader, that means the people supported him and later led a revolution in names of people like him and killed all the high priests and killed all the collaborators and killed all the people cooperating with the Roman authorities. You can't then have the Jews saying, his blood be on us and our people in perpetuity. You follow what I'm trying to say? You just, okay, that's in Matthew. You're mixing apples and oranges. This is in Luke. Well, that's what people do. They compress everything into one narrative. I got to hurry along here. Anyway, the weeping for ourselves and our children and Jerusalem, I think that did happen among the Jews after the fall of the temple. That is, there was a group called the Mourners for Zion who were weeping for the fall of the temple, and I'm sure that is incorporated into that particular passage there. Okay, another famous, I can't tell you much about, by the way, Luke 3rd, 23:32, he's got two malefactors. I don't have the Greek in front of me, but usually those are two, later on here, they're called in 27 of Mark and 37 or 38 of Matthew, thieves or robbers. That's the Greek word lestai. Brandon makes a lot out of that. Lestai really are what the Romans called bandits. They're not thieves. They're not like pickpockets. He was crucified among the thieves. Oh, that's how he was a low common criminal. No. Lestai was the word applied to revolutionaries in Josephus, all through Josephus. So you should read there, he was crucified between two bandits at the very least. And it's a lot different than thief or two revolutionaries. So we're getting revolutionaries and him being treated like a revolutionary, if this is an accurate presentation of the situation there. So that's very important, and that's where your Greek should come into. Here the Romans are behaving like Romans would, but it's being based on Psalm 69 and Psalm 22. So we're fulfilling prophecy, particularly giving him drink mingled with gall. I just don't have time to read those psalms to you, though. Psalm 69 is an Ebionite psalm. It mentions the poor and so on. And Psalm 22, I think, has to do with the casting of lots, etc., etc., etc. So, again, the writer is purposely, you say he's knowledgeable. Yeah, the writers here are very knowledgeable. They're not foolish people. They're very, very bright. They know what they're doing. They're very well educated, except in some areas, like the Son of Man, instead of a son, one like a Son of Man. So they know their scripture and so on and so forth. Okay, let's get the witnesses here. John 19:25. But they were standing at the cross, Jesus, his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Notice you see in John always Jesus' mother's never named Mary. Mary is the wife of Clopas. See that? And it's interesting. I do believe that that is really who Jesus' mother, or who the woman Mary we were supposed to think about, was married to, because the earliest church testimonies speak about, as I told you, Mary and Clopas had 4 children. The 4th is Joses, who I consider to be Jesus before Jesus became supernatural and turned into the supernatural Jesus. Got me? That's tough stuff, I know, but it's all in my James book. You have to think about it. And suddenly Mary Magdalene, who was nowhere to be found in the whole narrative except once he got threw out of 7 devils or something out of someone at one point, appears. So now our Marys start to proliferate, and believe me, I know Mary Magdalene, I know the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, I know the whole Mary Magdalene cult, I know the feminist interest in Mary Magdalene, I know Mary Magdalene as Jesus' girlfriend, I know Mary Magdalene as having a child by Jesus, I know the whole deal. Literature. History? I don't know. You'll have to, as literature, there's nothing wrong with it. You live in Hollywood. You live in Tinseltown. You know what scriptwriters can do with a story. You know what, they just give them one lead and off they go. They can write whole books. They can write series of screenplays on things. So again, I'm not saying that this isn't accurate or there wasn't a Mary Magdalene. She's so vague and so shadowy, it's really hard to get a hold on her. Now, in the resurrection scenarios, which we're coming into now, the last part of the Gospels, she plays an important role. Now, one thing is that a woman who's a nutty woman, and in those days I'm sure there were a lot of nutty women given the way they were treated. If you were beat down your whole life and just used as a child bearer, you might be a little bit out of your mind after a certain age, And I'm sure women had a reputation to some extent in that situation. So therefore the first rumor of a meeting, walking Jesus on earth is ascribed to this woman who's a little bit, gone. I don't think she's his girlfriend, frankly. So some people might have been saying, if there were such an idea abroad, that Jesus that the tomb was empty and that Jesus had somehow not died or been resurrected or whatever, however you want to think of it, then the accusation may have found, oh, well, the first person who saw this was a woman who would see things anyway. She was a woman who was a little bit disturbed and so on and so forth. Maybe that's how the character got more and more substance. And I don't know, John has her here as a witness to the crucifixion. In the meantime, the synoptics are following their Psalm scenario, and John is not paralleling them at all. So you get now Matthew. My wife was just talking about this because her hairdresser apparently whispered these words in her ear yesterday in the beauty parlor. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. In other words, some Aramaic, but it's really from the Psalms. What is it?
Where did she get her hair?
I have time to tell you all these things. I'm just saying, so it's on my mind here, so I stop with it. Why hast thou forsaken me? And then, of course, people think it's Elijah being called for, and they gave him vinegar to drink. That's also from one of the Psalms. These are all then now proof texts. Now, Brandon makes a good point of 45, and the veil of the temple was rent in their midst. This is 51 of Matthew and 38 of of Mark. So they all have that. Oh, by the way, Josephus has some of these things that the earth grew dark, or the earth grew light in the middle of the night, or dark, and I forget what, about the portents for the fall of the temple. And I've shown in my book that the Gospels just reverse what he has in those portents. You know, I think in the Gospels, it's the earth grows dark in the middle of the day, and in Josephus, the earth grows light in the middle of the night. And again, look at the portents for the fall of the temple at the end of Jewish War, book 6. It's in, you can't miss it. But the rending of the temple veil, I think, was important. When the booty was taken from Palestine to Rome after the war against Rome, and the Romans took the temple, apparently the temple veil was over where you walked into the Holy of Holies. The temple veil was damaged in the fighting and in the assault on the temple. And when it went to Rome, it was rent or ripped or whatever you want to call it. If there were any ripping in the veil, you see, prior to that, they just would have patched it up. So this was on display. These materials were on display in Rome, according to Brandon, and I think that's a good insight. It gives that as another indication. This is written after the fall of the temple, when people knew that somehow the temple veil had been, what do you call it, not ripped, but torn. In the altercations that were going on the Temple Mount between the soldiers and the resistors. And that's what they saw in Rome. So it's quite easy in the Roman community of Christians, Pauline communities, to have thought, oh, you see, the temple veil was ripped when our Savior gave out his last breath. And so on. Say, well, didn't it happen at this time? I don't know.
Is that the way they gave it to Titus?
I don't know. I'm just, I let you speculate. All these things are for you. I don't have time to, I just have time to point these things out to you. Now, going back to John, because I'm way behind here. I thought to go faster. There were standing by the cross, as we said, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and so on. And he introduces this character, and the disciples standing by whom Jesus loved. Notice all the standing. Standing, 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 standing again. And that, I've always told you, watch those standing usages. They may go back to the standing one. And then Jesus says to the disciple, behold your mother. Take her into your, the disciple took her into his own home. Now we know that, so this may be James, not John, who this disciple Jesus loved. I don't know who it's supposed to be. He's unnamed. Everyone assumes it's a John. Whoever John was, but we know James had a home in Jerusalem. How do we know that? From the Pseudo-Clementine recognitions. After James was injured on the Temple Mount, the people, James's followers, carried him out of the temple and took him to his home in Jerusalem, where they passed the night, and then they carried him down to Jericho the next morning. Now that's from a different testimony, and I assume James did have a home in Jerusalem, and I assume Mary lived with him. So in the book of Acts, what do you have? When Peter escapes from prison and leaves the country because the guard is executed, or some things happen in the altercation or whatever. He goes to Jerusalem. I don't know how he got up there so fast, wherever he was in prison, but anyways, he goes up there and he goes to Mary, the mother of John Mark's house, to leave him, and in that way Acts introduces John Mark, whoever he is, another of these multiplication of characters. But I would think that he goes to leave a message for James and the brothers. That's what Acts says. And that's the real James, because the other James has already been executed by Herod the Tetrarch with the sword, or Herod the king with the sword, at the beginning of that chapter. So the other James, whatever it is, it can't be the other James. So it's the first mention in Acts, it's around Acts 10 or 11, of James, the brother of Jesus. Now, look, why would you go to the home of John Mark, Mary, the mother of John Mark, and that's now a fourth Mary? You're getting a multiplication of Marys, that's a multiplication of Jameses, multiplication of Johns. This happens in literature as it spins off one narrative to another. Why would you go to Mary, the mother of John Mark's house, to leave a message for James and the brothers? I would think you would go to Mary, the mother of James' house, to leave a message for James and the brothers. So I just cite that as another possible proof, not possible, an echo that James had a house in Jerusalem. That's all I can make of this John having a house in Jerusalem. And I don't even know this is often called John the priest, the one who wrote the Apocalypse. This is often not John, the son of Zebedee. I have no idea about all these things. I don't think anyone else does either. Okay. So the veil of the temple was rent after Jesus cried this out and gave up his ghost. And the body of the saints that had fallen asleep were raised. That's very much in the Pseudo-Clementines, the tomb of the two brothers who had fallen asleep. Now a centurion. Oh, here we go with the good centurions again. That they were watching Jesus. They saw an earthquake, and the things were done, fearing exceedingly. Truly, this was the Son of God. Why is he the Son of God? Just because magical things occur, he's the Son of God? In any case, what's a centurion doing acknowledging a revolutionary crucified person as the Son of God? I mean, it's good for Hollywood, and Hollywood's made hundreds of movies about these things. The robe, the crucifix, so all kinds of movies about these things with the good centurions. But I don't think there were any good centurions. These were professional soldiers. They're not bad. They're just tough, brutal men. And they're not easily, but here again is the attempt to conciliate the Roman audience. Particularly Roman soldiers were interested in cults, the Mithra cult and a lot of other cults. Again, it's an attempt. Even Roman soldiers recognize Jesus, but his own people can't. I reject that. I think that is a slur. I know it's a common slur, everyone accepts it, but I think that's an historical slur which has done its work. The Jews are stubborn, the Jews are stiff-necked, the Jews don't like their own messianic leaders, the Jews kill their own messianic leaders. Well, maybe the Greeks killed Socrates, but I'm not aware of the Jews killing their own messianic leaders or their own prophets as the further libels continue, or the Jews celebrating the death of their messiah. I just think that all is part of the same libelous material thought up by Greek minds and imposed on the narrative in Palestine. Again, where is the story of historicity? I don't know. You'll have to choose it. Okay, so the Roman centurion recognizes Jesus. You know, this really mounts up until it's really heavy. Now here, look who's watching this situation. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joses, and it's not clear if she's also the mother of the sons of Zebedee, or if the mother of the sons of Zebedee is a different Mary. Mark has Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Less, so that would be James Alphaeus, James the brother of Jesus, all the time being camouflaged because they don't want you to think that James's brothers have the same mother as Jesus. That's what's going on here. And because over in Luke, what was it? Mary, the wife of Clopas. We're getting all the actual biography of Mary right here. She's the wife of Clopas, and she's the mother of the other brothers. Anyway, in one narrative, she's the mother of James and Joses, obviously two of the brothers of Jesus. Or James the Less, to putting him down, because the greater one was James the son of Zebedee. That's already, the multiplication of James's has already moved forward. And Salome. We know, therefore, I think at one point we know that Jesus has a sister, at least one, and many other women. In any case, the centurion in Luke 47 glorifies God. Well, I'm glad he did. Certainly this was a righteous man. Oh, another one. Pilate's wife recognizes him as a righteous man. Herod the Tetrarch recognizes John the Baptist as a righteous man. The centurion recognizes Jesus as a tzaddik. The most precious concept of the Jewish people now put in the mouths of the enemies of the Jewish people. The tzaddik is the most precious concept of the Dead Sea Scrolls, of Kabbalah, of the Zohar, of just of everything in Jewish culture. And now we have these things. Now look here. So now it was the day of the coming Sabbath. I'm going to try to hurry here, and I'm not doing very well here. I should have done this first, and like I was going to do at the beginning of this class. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the people. This is in John 19:32 and so on. And when they came to Jesus, they saw he was already dead. But they pierced his side and blood came out, not water. And you have to look at some Psalms for this. I think it's Psalm 34, huh? Yeah, 34:20, but I also think there is another one. In any case, you have to look at those Psalms. Not a bone of him shall be broken. All of these are misquoted. Again, to fulfill Scripture, I don't know where the bone of him shall be broken, but if you can find me that Psalm, I'll show you that's a totally Zionist Psalm again. Yeah, what's...
When they pierce the side, isn't that to keep them alive? Because that's the water in there would cause them to drown.
All I'm trying to say is that most of these things are taken out of an attempt to take passages out of Psalms and apply it. Most people see it as the opposite. The thing happens and then the Psalm is done. I have to hurry along, so I can't answer your question on that. But if someone could find me the Psalm, or it could be from Exodus, I just don't have it in front of me. Maybe I have it in this book here. It's John. What number John is it? What number John? It's John 19. I think it's Psalm 22. 22:18 I have written there. But that's dividing the clothes. No. Where is this other one? John, what is it? John?
34:20.
Yeah, I can't find it. But in any case, Josephus tells about the fact that they didn't want to leave people up past nightfall. In the story, in the passage where he talks about the death of Ananus and the care Jews took. But this, not a bone will be broken. It's very telling. I think it may be 1246, Psalm 1246. Anyway, here we have now the burial scenes. Joseph of Arimathea comes, a rich man, a righteous man, another tzaddik. No one's ever identified Arimathea. People have often suggested that is Joseph bar Matthew. Joseph bar Matthew. Joseph the son of Matthias or Matthew, which is Josephus' own name. But no one has ever identified a place called Joseph of Arimathea, and where this character suddenly pops up from. Although the English love to talk about him because he supposedly brought the Holy Grail to England, and the Knights of the Round Table are founded on all of his activities. Well, this is how these kinds of things snowball into over time and centuries. In any case, Joseph did all this material about the tomb. I don't have time to go into it. In John, it's Nicodemus appears again. And Nicodemus, as I've shown you in my new book where I have a Nakdiman, and Nicodemus is Nakdiman in the Talmud. And there are all kinds of legends, and he's a rich man. And there are all kinds of legends about making rain and so on. And the dogs coming to his door or his friend's door, hungry, and going away filled, etc. And that's all, and the myrrh, and the women pouring the myrrh on Jesus' feet, and anointing his feet with the myrrh, and buying the expensive ointment for his burial day, and so on and so forth. It's a very complicated material. I don't really have too much time to deal with that, obviously, but that's something that has to be looked at real carefully. Who just Arimathea is, who this Nicodemus may or may not be, what this tomb is. I end up with some conclusions about the tomb in the New Testament Code, that it's something to do with the tomb of Queen Helen of Adiabene. But she obviously is the widow of Nun, who is weeping for her children. There's a passage in one of the things about the widow of Nun. That would be Queen Helen of Adiabene, who was a widow, bewailing her children. Her son is predeceased her. Anyway, there's a famous tomb in Jerusalem that's still there, and you can go and see it. It's called the Tomb of the Kings. It's right outside the walls of Jerusalem. And there may be a lot of stories connected to the burial situations of that tomb and so on. But I'm not able to go further than that with your material here. You can take it at face value if you feel it's you can identify a person either called Nicodemus or a person called Joseph of Arimathea, who I'm sure is totally fictional. But, you know, if you can find him, that's good. Let's go on to the resurrection morning. So now we have Mary Magdalene, Matthew, and the other Mary go to see the sepulchre. For Mark, it's Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome. Once again, we have that problem of the other Mary, clearly Jesus' mother, and the mother of the brothers. And they want to anoint him. And in the one, they roll away the stone. And in Matthew, they see an angel, lightning, and his raiment white. Let's see. In Mark, the ending of Mark, by the way, has been lost. They see a young man sitting on the right side in a white robe. In Luke, they see two men, line 4, standing beside them in dazzling apparel. In John, Luke doesn't, I don't think, names who goes in there. It's just they in Luke.
It says, down in verse 10, Mary Magdalene.
Okay, well, I'm looking at this first page. I stand corrected. And John, Mary Magdalene goes alone. So far, none of these accounts are going to agree with each other. And Matthew then has the single angel say, "Go to Galilee where he awaits you." Luke doesn't agree with the post-resurrection appearances being in Galilee. He has the first one taking place where? In Jerusalem on the Emmaus Road. And that looks like the appearance in the Gospel of the Hebrews, according to Jerome, of Jesus to his brother. Drink thy food, eat thy food, drink thy drink, for your brother or the Son of Man is risen, as Jesus meets his brother and designates him as his principal successor in the so-called Gospel of the Hebrews, conserved only in the 5th century church father Jerome. Anyway, Mark agrees with Matthew. He goes before you to Galilee. In Luke 24, the two men basically say the same thing. Go and tell these to the 11. Okay, there it is. Now there's Mary Magdalene, and he adds a person, Joanna. So now there's 3 women now. One has two women, one clearly the mother of this is just called the mother of James, but I think we know who this is supposed to be. So Jesus' mother is involved in all these things according to the Gospels. Now Peter nowhere has a post-resurrection encounter with Jesus. He goes into the tomb and he sees the linen clothes, but he doesn't see Jesus, according to Luke 12. John picks that thread up. Mary Magdalene saw, what did Mary Magdalene see in John? She sees the empty tomb. And Peter, this is a good one, and Peter and the disciple Jesus loved, whoever he's supposed to be, are running to the tomb. And then she yells to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb." So the other disciple and Peter run towards the tomb, and they sort of outrun each other and have a race. Totally different than the other ones here, as you see. But the other disciple outran Peter, of course. And he came first in the tomb, and he sees the linen clothes. In Luke, Peter sees the linen clothes. In John, Peter doesn't see the linen clothes first. The disciple Jesus loves sees the linen clothes lying there. But they didn't know what to make of it all, John 9 says, because they didn't know that he was supposed to be resurrected. Okay, going back to Matthew. And so in Matthew 9, Jesus meets them, plural, and says, "Go tell the brothers," or my brothers. So he meets them, plural, and I suppose we're talking about Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. Very confusing, you'll have to figure it out yourself. Mark is considered defective at this point because the ending of Mark was supposed to be lost, but in any case, now 9 in Mark is now on the the first day of the week he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, who had cast out of whom he had cast 7 devils. And she went and told them, number and whoever they were, not really clear. Now in John, so they enter the tomb, but Mary was standing there, standing again, weeping. And she sees 2 angels and asks where they've taken Jesus. And suddenly Jesus is standing, there's the standing one. John 20:14. It's really complicated if you see when you do it with the Harmony of the Gospels. Behind her, and so for John, I think, I'm not mistaken, I'm all confused now. She's the first one that sees Jesus, and she's alone. And she says, Father, Father, Rabboni, Master, and so on, and so, and the same thing, go to the brothers, etc., 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 etc. Matthew 28, the rumor is abroad that, I think, isn't it, that the disciples came by night and stole his body away. Matthew 28:11, right? That may have been what happened, because that was quite normal for a revolutionary leader to have disciples do that. So I'm not saying that it did or didn't happen. I'm saying that is a possible scenario that people do, and Matthew does mention that. It dismisses it. Now in Mark 16:12. He was manifested to 2 of them as they walked on their way in the country. That is an approximation of Luke 24:13-35, which is the appearance on the road to Emmaus. So he doesn't first go up to Galilee, and now he's outside of Jerusalem at Emmaus, which is on the way to down into the coastal area. And one of them is called Cleopas, and the other is unnamed. And they discuss things. It's a very long episode, and they don't really recognize him. And in line 30, they sit down to eat and break bread with him, and at that moment when he gives them the bread, their eyes are opened. And they're the ones who go and tell the 11 that they've met Jesus. So that's opposed to the Mary Magdalene story. Okay, are you following me here to some extent? You'll have to read this more carefully yourself. Now, the disciples cry out and say, the Lord is risen indeed and hath appeared to Simon. Well, what are you talking about? He never did appear to Simon in this narrative. He appeared to Cleopas and another. So how can you say the Lord appeared to Simon? This may be Simeon Bar Cleophas we're talking about, the second successor to Jesus, and often the appearances are connected to your position in the early church. It certainly isn't Simon Peter, because I'm not aware, I haven't seen any appearance yet to Simon Peter. There may have been one with the they ones, I'm totally confused with it. Peter only sees an empty tomb. John outruns Peter in seeing the empty tomb. I don't know. So these 2 men, or this could be James and his brother Simon, all sons of Cleophas. It may not be Cleophas, it may be the son of Cleophas. Anyway, that's supposed to clearly be the same person who's Mary's husband. It's a very important sighting in Luke. I can only call your attention. I don't have time to go into it. Mark 14, the 11 are sitting at meat. And then in Luke 24:36, Jesus appeared. And by the way, the first appearance to James in the Gospel of the Hebrews is when they sit down and eat, and Jesus gives the cup and the plate to James, and he says to him that the Son of Man or your brother has risen from the dead. So a lot in common with the Emmaus Road episode, first appearance to James. I make a lot of that in my James Brother Jesus book. Notice in John 20:19, the disciples and everyone were there, and Jesus came and stood in their midst, miraculously standing, the standing one again. All of those, you see the standing is really meaningful here. He stands in their midst and he shows them the wounds and so on and so forth. And then he says, have you anything, well, that's in Luke. After he comes in and shows them the same things, after the Emmaus Road, have you anything to eat? And they gave him some boiled fish. That's nice. So he shows that he's substantial. But Thomas, now in John, who is introduced as Didymus is twin here, was with them, and he won't believe until he can put his finger in the wounds. So we have a lot of different traditions here. In any case, we move up to Galilee, and we get a lot of people up there in John. Simon Peter, Didymus Thomas, twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, Canaanians, the miracle of Cana, the sons of Zebedee, and two other. And Jesus stood on the beach. We're getting these miraculous Dionysus-like appearances where the gods can move through doors and come unannounced through walls and things of that kind. Very, very Greek presentation of literature here. He stood on the beach, again the standings, and they didn't know it was Jesus. And again they eat. And then Jesus specifically notes Simon, son of John, do you love me, 15. And then they compete, and Simon he's jealous of the disciple Jesus loved, and he complains. And then Jesus tells him, if I want him to wait for me, why are you complaining? That's in line 23. All right, let's skip along here to Matthew 28, Mark 26. Jesus is on the mountain in Galilee. The 11 disciples go before him up there. I guess he transfigured himself there. And what happens there? Jesus comes and spoke to them, giving them authority in heaven and earth, and make disciples of all nations. Previously in Matthew, it's nothing will disappear from the law until all these things are accomplished. Now he announces the Pauline Gentile mission here. Luke ends here, Luke 24. He interprets Scripture, explains the rising on the third day idea, and even mentions the word tarry in line 49, and power, like John did, but with a different meaning about tarrying. Doesn't have the preference for the disciple Jesus loved. And they worship him, God-like, and they return to Jerusalem, or in the temple continuously. So they go back to Jerusalem and the temple, all of the disciples and so on. There's one appearance though that I skipped where Jesus appears to them all when they're congregated. Where is that one again? Before we close here, after the Emmaus Road, I think it's on the Emmaus Road one. I can't find it, but I think that's where there's an appearance to all of the disciples. What was it?
It's Luke 24:33.
Luke 24:33.
The 11 gathered.
And they rose up and then we did cover that, I suppose. All right, I have to let you handle all that stuff yourself. You have an evaluation to do, right? Okay, you want to do that? Meantime, I thank you guys for bearing with my horrendous thing. As far as, she's giving out the evaluation and explaining the numbers on it, and I'll get out the door. Let me tell you about the final exam. She's not going to give it out, I suppose, while we're talking about the final exam. 6 identifications taken mostly from this gospel material, different things like Cleopas, Herod the Tetrarch, identifications like that you should be able to find. You can bring your Gospels, you can bring Josephus, you can't bring my books or any other books. You can bring notes on note cards. 2 out of 3 essays. What kind of essays can we expect? We've done an awful lot, we've covered a lot of things. I think the last exam went up to the time around the death of John the Baptist, but we could recapitulate that, some of that kind of material. We can deal with some of these miracle working stories. We can deal with the problem of the food going into the mouth, going out the body, and it's what comes out of the mouth, declaring all foods clean, the purity regulations that Jesus does or not abolished. We can deal with the problems of whether he's a revolutionary or not. We can deal with the crucifixion episodes on that account. We can deal with the resurrection episodes. There's a lot to get your teeth into comparing one resurrection episode to another, trying to make a sense of who's who, what happens. One angel, two angels, Mary seeing him, Simon seeing him, who sees him on the road, who doesn't see him on the road, whether he appears first in Jerusalem on the road to Emmaus, whether he appears first in Galilee, as the angels say, go to Galilee. All that kind of thing is you can discuss. So there's at least 4 or 5 different essays that I can try to formulate. I haven't formulated an essay yet, but you'll do 2 out of 3. And my heart goes with you. It's a terrible subject to have to try to wrestle with in an exam, and a terrible subject to find a question, but we'll all do our best. Thanks a lot. Sign up sheet here. Okay, come out in the hallway while she's doing this. You need some erasers. You can play